We always had music around. My mom's very young, so my mom and dad both. There was always these 45 records around of, 50s and 60s rock and roll stuff. There was always a radio on, CKLW, the Big 8 AM radio out of Detroit was always on. You heard all the Motown, all the top 40 stuff, late 60s through the 70s, Detroit rock radio. Yeah.
MC5?
You heard MC5 and the Stooges on fucking CKLW. I mean, you heard it. You did. Not very often. You heard Funkadelic, as well as like the top 40 stuff at the time. And, they were very regional centric. They played stuff from the area. I mean, I was fortunate to grow up where it was like, you could hear that music. It wasn't a big deal to hear it on AM radio. And then later, FM radio, you just got immersed in, that Detroit working class rock radio.
The first time that music really affected me deeply was it was 1967. It was my brother-in-law. He was an audiophile, but he just got the reel-to-reel to Sgt. Pepper's, and I would come over to their house, and to keep me out of their hair, they would put headphones, big-ass cans on my head, and I listened to Sgt. Pepper's like all the way through on a reel-to-reel tape. And it just blew my mind. Every time I went over there, I'd want to listen to that thing. I would sit in that chair, and he'd run it over and over and over again. I wouldn't leave the chair while we were at their house. I was taking organ lessons, which I took for a number of years. Ended up playing organ in church for Good Friday when I was 14 years old. So I was a certified geek, And then I just stopped playing organ. I was told I was adopted when I was 15 when we moved up north. So things kind of changed in my brain. I kind of went a little crazier, and I was looking for the harshest music I could find. And back then it was living in the country, Ted Nugent, Kiss, and all these kind of bands. And once again, headphones, and I would just like sit there with the on 10, just blowing my ears out, and that's all you get until punk, and that was when I went away to college, discovered punk in 1978.
When I got to be a teenager, it was, it was kind of a cool thing to like want to play a guitar or, music. Play along with it somehow. And, that's how I kind of got interested in it.
The name of the band was from a passage from Dion Fortune, Psychic Self-Defense. She was describing a band of people who were white magicians that were going after black magicians that that were trying to destroy things. She was trying to be the good witch. We just thought it was kind of a funny name, and it fit our kind of rural surroundings also.
around the age of 13, I started going to all ages punk shows and playing in bands in St. Louis, and which is where I grew up. And then just getting really into buying records, going to Vintage Vinyl in St. Louis, and getting sort of following two paths, which was sort of that path of New Order and learning more and more about electronic music and new wave and synthesizer music, and by proxy then industrial and everything that was happening in that world. And then also following this path of my sort of teen aggression and anger and hatred and sneaking out of the house and going to punk shows and getting really into that world and wanting more than anything to play in a punk and hardcore band, and then buying tons of records, you know, the punk and oi and hardcore scene. I would write to record labels that I knew were run by friends, and I'd say, hey, have you ever thought about re-releasing this stuff? Like, here's their, and I would send them links, and I would have this whole idea, this whole dossier. I'd had the whole release imagined in my head. Why shouldn't you do this? You know, you should go do this. This is a great idea. This record, people need this record. One of my closest friends is a guy by the name of Ryan Martin. We became fast friends, really connecting over music, and we would often trade tapes and artwork together. So we just started talking about starting a label, like, hey, what if we did this ourselves? And around the same time, Ryan began working for Genesis Peorage as her manager and really assisting in bundling and in sort of going through all of the art archives and categorizing it and recording all the information and preparing it for, I think, what would eventually be sale of some of the material. In the archives, Ryan came across a legendary acetate for Early Worm, which, if you read any of the books, Records of Civilization, or any of the documents about the history of industrial, they all sort of come back to this record, which is, you know, before Throbbing Gristle there was Coombe, and before Coombe there was this weird project called Early Worm that was Jen and a few of the players in their parents' attic and hall making weird noise, you know, spoken word, experimentation. Nobody had ever heard it. It's because there was only one of them. They'd mailed away in the back of a catalog, sent the tape off, and gotten back one record. This was our first release. There it is. And that was the beginning. And that was in...
Can you hold it up again?
Yeah. This was in 2007. And that was the first record we released. And that sort of set the tone and the tempo for our label and everything that we were going to be doing.
I was living in the dorm and listened to a radio station that was playing, he was playing Talking Heads and that kind of thing back in '78 was pretty unusual. So I called up this person, ended up being Mark Redpath, and he was involved with a group of other artists, mainly in the university. And we got together to do a band called All Night Movies, and it was all supposed to be all improvised. Things kind of got more organized as we went along, and songs fell into place. It was basically improvised. I didn't want to play organ. I never wanted to look back on playing music again. I was already anti-music. So what I ended up playing was I took a suitcase, an old suitcase. I smashed glass into the suitcase because I was trying to get some sort of a snare sound. So I want to play drums in this. We didn't have anybody playing drums. Suitcase, I had a bird cage that was hanging from the thing, and I would hit the bottom of the bird cage for some sort of a crash, and I think I had a saxophone too, which I didn't know how to play, so it was just god awful, you know, when I played sax. But got together with these guys and we played around Michigan for a little while. We played down in Detroit once and Lansing, you know, and CMU a number of times. And then it was just a steady, just a really whirlwind couple years, because I went from punk to post-punk and just like digesting everything. In the course of maybe a year and a half, 2 years, you know, it was a whirlwind. It was just constant discovery. You know, you think, oh man, this band's fucking great. This band's great, and just, you know, until like Throbbing Gristle, and that's the one that kind of locked me in.
knew that you know, you could listen to like the Amboy Dukes and, you know, Journey to the Center of the Mind, and hear, you know, Ted Nugent's, like the feedback. The whole song is just a sonic adventure, and you know, that fascinated me to no end. You know, that sound. What is he doing? What is that sound? How is he making that sound? I was just completely, you know, just curious about those kind of things. You know.
What was the first show you ever went to?
Oh Christ. I'm thinking about
Or early show?
real show. There was a. I can exactly remember there was like the carnival that came through Port Huron every year, the Blue Water Festival, and they would have like a flatbed trailer with bands playing, and I never forget this one summer. Must have been '75, and there was a band called Sweet Leaf. And it was these total like long-haired Hesher dudes that were just like, the guy had a flying V, and they just played like Sabbath tunes. And I just remember going like, I want to do that. You know, I don't know if I want to play like Black Sabbath covers all day long, but it was just like, it was so impressionable on me. I couldn't. I mean, I just thought about this right now. Wire 154 is beyond, because they're making all those guitars sound not like guitars, but they sound like guitars at the same time. And I listened to it, and I was like, and I was playing in a punk rock band at the time, and we had all of our instruments around and at my house, and I noticed if I could lean a bass guitar across a bass amp or a guitar amp, that it would make the most insane sound. So that was my introduction to noise. That's how I, you know, at the same time I loved Throbbing Gristle and SBK at the same time, at that time, but I hadn't consciously thought of like, well, I want to make noise.
When CMU asked me to leave, I ended up, I had met a person from Port Huron and came down here for a show, and there was a band called Problem.
They're more in the realm of like a Cabaret Voltaire, Throbbing Gristle-ish kind of thing. They had instruments. Every guy had like, I'm the drum machine guy, I'm the guitar player guy. But they were fucking huge. I mean, huge to me. It was like, wow, there's somebody here in my town, a little shit-eating town. So somebody's here making this kind of sound, right? Making cool flyers, and just. I can't even tell you how huge that was. So Lon moved to Port Huron on those guys, you know, them being a band. Like, wow, you're from Port Huron? I'm moving to Port Huron.
I was going to Central Michigan University. The group of people that I was involved with this band, I think 3 out of the band members had zines. And I started a zine called Smart Magazine. It was usually just a 1-page, maybe a 2 or 3 at the most, all hand done. And mostly reviews of bands, reviews of records. And so when I came to town, I was still doing that. I think I did 1 issue when I was in town. And I was working at the record store, Full Moon Records at that time.
He was probably the nicest guy that worked at Full Moon Records. Everybody else was kind of pricks. And we kind of hit it off. And I said, you know, I'm making these tapes, these weird tapes. Could you put it up on the wall and make them for sale? And he was like, yeah, sure. And you know, bring them in. I gave him the tapes. And he's like, okay. And they were totally like one handmade. Like every one was like an individual dupe. And he put them on the wall. I don't know that they sold, like maybe 3 or 4 of them. I don't know who has them.
So Skott was a customer, and he was putting out cassettes called Screw Machine.
Well, what if I, you know, took this tape recorder and like put it on a string and put it down in the pump house, because we had a well. We lived in a rural Michigan, you know. It was like we had a pump house. That's our water came from a well, and the pump house made this crazy sound, and you could hear it. It was like this cycle, and it's on it's on the Screw Machine tapes. You know, that's why I started Screw Machine, because I was doing that, and I was working at a place. It was a screw machine factory. It was a factory. It had like 50 screw machines. You drive into the parking lot, and all you could hear was like, shh.
We decided to do a magazine together, Smart Magazine, SM, Screw Machine, SM Operations. That's how that ended up coming out. We also started doing music together. We just got together one time just to see if we could really work together. And that actually ended up on Will. The song SM Operations was the first thing we did when we got together.
And at the very same time, the guys from Problem and Hate Gray, they split up and they all decided they were moving to San Francisco. And they're going to sell everything. So I bought all of their gear. And me and Lon and one of the guys that was left from that band, we kind of got together. I don't know that we like jammed, but we practiced and said, wow, this is really cool, and let's do this show at the Harrington. Let's do a show.
So they went on stealing and stealing all your feeling and scratching for survival. There were two brothers I once knew in the town of old Port Huron. Their minds were sharp, their hearts were true. They frequently did turn on. They were skating for Satan and scratching for survival. They were skating for Satan and scratching for survival. They were teleported to a land where they were total strangers.
We were getting ready to do the show at the Harrington Ballroom, the second hunting lot show. And it was going to be an SM Operations show. And he said, what do you think about having this guy come in and play? He's like this weirdo. And I said, yeah, I don't know. I don't know the guy. I lived like north of where John Wright lived. And he's like, just pick him up on your way in and come down. We'll have a meeting at the record store. I was like, okay. So I showed up and I went to where he lived. And it was like this weird cabin on the beach. There was no electricity. I show up and I'm like knocking on the door. And it's hotter than hell. It's summertime. It's at night, and this guy comes to the door with like just jeans and no shirt, and he's just like, he's a big dude, like he's bigger than me. and he's just like glistening. He's got something all over his body, something like weird and greasy. And he was like, I said, hey, I'm Scott from Hunting Lodge. I'm coming to pick you up. And he just like laughed like a maniac and was like, okay. And he's like, I just got to get some stuff. And he grabbed like this milk jug full of this weird oily looking substance and got in the car. And at the time I had this 69 Z28 Camaro that was like my prized possession. And he gets in this weird like oily body, and he's just like slapping on the car and hanging out the window going like, woohoo, this is rad and crazy. And we go to Full Moon and we have this meeting, and he leaves, and I told Lon, I was like, that guy is fucking nuts. And he's like, yeah, isn't it great? And I was like, so he performed, and you can hear the tape. I mean, people are, people were their jaws opened, and they were like,
Thorazine, 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 Thorazine. I sing about my problems to help me stand the pain. She says she's gonna call a body and leave me.
Well, John Wright was a fixture in town. He was this giant man who would always, even in the hottest days of the summertime, wear this giant leather hat and a fringed leather jacket, like brown leather jacket. I think it's pretty much what we had on the cover of the cassette we put out. But he would walk around town, and I worked at a record store at the time, Full Moon, and he would come into Full Moon and he would give me cassettes. I was, a captive audience, so he'd come in and start talking to me about his theories about Bob Dylan and all the town people and so on. And I started looking into him a little bit more and listening to the cassettes, and it was just fascinating stuff. I mean, he had a worldview that really, it was like drugs. Just going into John Wright's mind was like taking drugs.
Aloha. Aloha Pumehana. I am John Wright. John North Wright, a former master of the written word, now too close to age 50 to have any more patience with such an obsolete medium. I have now spent roughly half of my life living here in Port Huron, Michigan, and the other half living somewhere else.
He was just from another place, He really interesting guy, did great stuff, but he had his own sense of timing. He had his own sense of the way the world ran, and it was just fascinating. His whole thing was he was so angry at Bob Dylan for precognizing his work. Bob Dylan stole all of his songs, apparently stole his girlfriend Marty, so he was on this vendetta against Bob Dylan, and a radio station in East Lansing was, if they were playing Bob Dylan or else they were just known to play a lot of Bob Dylan. He walked into the station one day and apparently started getting irate with some of the DJs. The DJs called the cops, and the cops got there, and when they were interviewing him, he was agitated. He could get agitated. The cops got there and was asking him what's the deal, and he was like saying, what he's mad at. Oh, who else are you mad at? Who else you want to kill? And it was that kind of thing. It's like, oh, you mad at, this person? You mad at? Oh, I'm mad at George Bush, the CIA also. You'd probably kill him or something. So yeah, I would. They just got him. Pretty much. They got him so agitated, and they just kept making him talk and hang himself.
Standing by the river, watching it flow by, thinking about them funky lights I once saw up in the sky, and all the crazy things that came as time kept passing by. Wish we didn't have to wait so long. Wish we didn't have
Let's kick his ass. Come on, everybody. Let's kick his ass. He's crazy. He thinks he can fly. And I ran inside the house. Well, I told the Amakua, this may well have been a rigged experiment. The first boy, as well as the other two, may well have been working for some secret intelligence agency or secret society or conspiracy of some kind.
If you look at our discography and you look at what Deus over the years has released, both from new artists and from old, some of the re-release, some of the rare stuff, Hunting Lodge is just a shoe-in, you know, like an obvious pick. I consider them, and Ryan and I both consider them to be, you know, among the pillars of American industrial, alongside, you know, Sleep Chamber, Deviation Social, Coup de Grace, Monty. So I think that having the opportunity to work with them on re-releasing their, you know, reissuing Will, which is just a massive, heavy record, was awesome. And while it was clearly influenced by SPK, Throbbing Gristle, it remains uncontrived, very singular, and clearly American, which is something that really interested us.
To me, Will is the record. Will is like the defining, like, the Hunting Lodge, like, record. It has industrial rhythms, a ton of noise. It's the definitive, like, we were in that moment. That was like, we made that record. Lon and I made that record together, and it was very organic.
The way Hunting Lodge progressed, I would say at the very beginning, Skott and I were disciples of SPK and MB. MB was a giant influence on us. When we first started working together, it was mostly noisy drone type of stuff. The way I worked was the machines I figured out a way to let them talk. And, the machines will, if you just start playing with them, they'll suggest, to me, the good machines will suggest things that they want to do. And it was easy with a lot of the analog equipment. I would just buy these cheap machines. I'd buy the harmonizers, delays, of course the tape echoes, and just use a microphone. The rhythm of the tape echo suggested the rhythm of the song, and there you go.
Back in those days, if you told people that you were in an industrial band, they would look at you like you had two heads. They're like, what the fuck are you talking about? What is an industrial band? You couldn't say we play noise. And I would say that back.
I always use the term avant-garde rock.
You know what? Avant-garde rock is that's over my head. I would say.
Just because I got tired of saying, like.
I would say, like, oh, we're, it's industrial. And they're like, what's industrial? They're like, well, it's noise. You know, they'd walk away like, okay, whatever. But now people have an idea of that. But back then, it always seemed to me like we were doing what we were supposed to be doing, but that nobody got it. Like why doesn't anybody get this? And then when you get a response from like Europe, from Germany, and they're like, yeah, we want to put your record out. You're like, well, why do they get it? And we can't get a show in Detroit. I don't know why. I grew up thinking like we should be accepted, you know, in Detroit, in Michigan. We should be accepted, and we definitely we never were. Never. We couldn't fucking get arrested in Detroit.
You know, for me, it was mainly about the machines. That's how I wasn't really saying I'm going to have this sound that I want to get out of this machine and then make the machine do it. It was the other way around. I would just start playing with them, and they would suggest things. And this happened all the way up through I think 8-Ball. 8-Ball was kind of a. I made the mistake of going all digital, and all of a sudden the machine stopped talking. Now these digital machines, they demanded my input. I was now completely the composer. I didn't want to do that. I didn't really want to make music. I never put more than a few notes in a song. I was just anti anything that was nice, anything was pretty. you know, the basic progression of the band then was kind of drony noise at the beginning, and then into maybe more of a tribal thing with Nomad Souls era. That's when the samplers came in. I was more interested in making full-fledged songs by that time. Interested in rhythm. Rhythm was now a thing that I wanted to concentrate on. But Nomad Souls, I think, is probably the pinnacle of what I would think of as Hunting Lodge. And that was on the same time we did Try Warning Shot, which is, you know, they kind of go hand in hand. And after that, it was just kind of a slow slog to the end. You know, the 8-ball era is just kind of, you know, it just kind of went, and it just kind of petered out once it went all digital.
Serious psychotics. Hunting Lodge, I don't know where they come from. I do know I don't want to go there. They make Big Black sound like the Carpenters.
The joy was out of it. The obsession was out of it for me. You know, going into the studio now was something I did. I felt like I wanted to keep it going for my bandmates, and I thought this was something we should be doing rather than me just being obsessed with the machines. So it was a long, slow downward spiral. The thing that I think really did it for me was that the tour we did around 8-Ball. I was never crazy about playing live. The way we ended up playing live towards the end was with a lot of backing tapes, and this was common for people like us, but it seemed to be such a false way to do it. Much of the show was already on tape. I didn't like it. It couldn't change like a real band could change. A band can change tempos from night to night if they want. They have more freedom. We were locked in the same damn set. If you followed us on tour, you'd hear the same set every show. Once in a while, I'd have some fun on stage, but a lot of times I'm not. I didn't do this to be on stage. I didn't do this because I want people to see me performing. I couldn't care less about it, really. I did that mostly for promotion. I did it for Skott. He loved being on stage. He was great at it. For me, I couldn't care less. I'd rather be in the studio and just, making those machines talk. it did blow people's minds that I would quit so drastically or so completely when I was so involved. I mean, that was my life. Then all of a sudden, you know, in the span of a few months, it seemed to people, they didn't really see the gradual, you know, 4 or 5 years where it kind of just faded out. But it just seemed like I just did that. But I mean, that's something I've done throughout my life. I just have an obsession, and I just put everything into that obsession, and I can be done with it.
I moved to LA, and I brought my stuff with me. I didn't really play music. I mean, I played by myself in the apartment. I didn't record anything. I was working. I got a job. I worked for Rick Rubin. I worked for, you know, a major concert promoter here. I was schlepping gear for bands, you know, and then I tour managed for a long time. And then I was a guitar tech for a long time. So I was always around music, but it was, you know, that other different level, other category, you know, where you're touring in like tour buses, you know, that sort of thing. I was more into art at the time. I was drawing. I was trying to be an artist and not a guitarist or a noisist. I was just doing that shit, and then I joined Fort Flung, and I got back into music at that point. LA space rock band. It'd been around forever, seemingly at the time, who were great. I'd seen them many times. I thought they were an amazing band, and then I became friends with them, and just by happenstance, they asked me to join the band, and I was like, I had played guitar. You know, we needed a guitar player. I hadn't played guitar in forever, it seemed like. But I still had my noise boxes, and I said, okay, we'll play, and we jammed together, and it was the first time I actually played in a band. You know, Lon and I were a band, you know, and then when Clay joined Hunting Lodge, it was kind of a band, right, because of the drummer, bass thing, but it wasn't like Far Flung. Far Flung was completely organic. It was space rock. It was experimental. And I got to play guitar and make a guitar not sound like a guitar. But you know, Far Flung that was my getting back into making sounds. It was a space rock band. We toured Europe. We played with Nick Turner from Hawkwind. We were, you know, it was fun. The Witches of Malibu started out as a joke that was going to just be like a joke band, a fake joke band. I read a review for some band that was like a noise band. It was on the Quietest page, and they were just so serious and so like secretive, and they're like, nobody can know who we are, and nobody can know. We play in other bands that are very important, and we make this music that is so avant-garde and like underground, and we can't let anybody know it's us because it'll ruin our, you know, thing. And I was like, what a bunch of pompous pricks. And I was like, my next fake band is I'm gonna like make this band that like is so underground, like nobody's ever even heard of them. For some reason I thought of Witches of Malibu, and I thought of these like floating hats. Korg put out these little mini synthesizers. The Monotrons.
Yeah, the Monotron.
They're amazing. They're really amazing for what they cost. They're like $50, something like that, 50, 60 bucks. And these are the delay ones. And I had been experimenting with noise a little bit and trying to record from home. I was trying to raise 2 kids and work. It wasn't easy, but they put out these little things, and I start making sounds with those and putting it together, and I made some really good tracks that were just like really fucked up. And I talked to Lon Diehl. As much as he doesn't want to think that he's in the music business anymore, I still talk to him.
In the 90s, I put all the music aside. I didn't do any kind of music at all. I was always interested in time shifting back in the day, the tape echoes and the digital delays and the harmonizer. All the time shifting equipment always interested me, so I thought the looper would be a fun thing to do. So I grabbed the looper, started using that a little bit. I did a song and I put a YouTube video out with this song. It was just, some really super noisy, aggressive thing. And Chip Flynn, who was in kind of the 4th Hunting Lodge member around 8 Ball time, and he heard the thing. He says, "Man, you still got it. We should do something. I do these shows. Why don't you come down? You can help me play." So he kind of, it was the free drug at the beginning that kind of gets you hooked back in again. So I came down there and did effects on one of his shows. He does these robotic shows. I started doing shows with them, just doing easy things like just effects on what they were already producing. And the next thing you know, we ended up, I was going to do a show with them, and Skott was coming back into town. And so I thought, let's do a show together with Ape Technology. Already at that point, I saw myself, once again, the fever started coming on a little bit, and I thought, Skott had to go back to LA. Working with Skott, it was always an easy thing for me. I could never find someone else to work with. Skott and we have an understanding, and it was really easy to work with him, and it was hard to do without him. Already by this time, I've gotten tired of doing the drones. This mirrors the early Hunting Lodge exactly, because I start by doing very noisy things, very disjointed, and then I say, okay, I've done that, and then it kind of moves on, and I'm more interested in rhythms and so on. And I tried to put together a band where there was a few people down there. They were doing great stuff on their own. It just didn't come together, and it was frustrating because I saw in my head what this could be, but it wasn't something they really wanted to do. They really enjoyed doing the noisier drones, and they were fine with just doing that. And they're good at it, but I wanted to move on, and that became frustrating enough that it finally like, okay, what am I doing? I gotta move away from this again. And so I finally had to just pull the plug. You know, it was great though. We got to do those shows with Skott, which was a lot of fun, very very rewarding. You know, it's a pale imitation of what we did back in the 80s, you know, especially the early 80s. But you know, worthwhile, and it was fun doing it.
Try and turn this on here. Why does it make no? Oh, I turn these off for filming. I can afford to buy some boxes, and I can make some noise, and I will. I will. I mean, I can't. I'd love to play guitar. I'd love to play punk rock and like classic, you know, like, oh man, I'd really like to learn that Zeppelin lick, you know, but I can't. But I can take those boxes and I can make a shit ton of fucking noise and make it sound like nobody else. And it's me. It's my noise. It's my sound.